A second chance to avoid jail over traffic fines. Who benefits most? Plus, another marathon listening session opposing mask mandates. Will anything change? And drastic and very harmful. A governor's warning about possible cuts to state services. That's what we're talking about right now on Kansas Week.
Southwest National Bank has proudly served Wichita and its surrounding communities for over 100 years. We are happy to support KPTS, Public Television for Kansas.
I'm Pilar Pedraza, and this is Kansas Week. Welcome back after our 3-week break, and a special welcome to our new audience members on KTV. We start today with a warning from the governor about the budget, telling lawmakers this week that drastic and very harmful cuts will be in Kansas' future if we don't get more aid from the federal government. She gave Congress a similar warning last week. From highways and byways to your child's classroom, your taxes pay for a lot of state services. But with a state facing a more than $500 million shortfall this year, more next year, something will have to give. Governor Laura Kelly joined 3 other state governors Thursday testifying before a U.S. House committee that states need federal aid to fill those budget holes that the pandemic created.
This pandemic is different, and the fix isn't as simple as just tightening our belt buckle. Our federal partners must step in and help.
Kelly said one thing Kansans have learned from experience is that deep cuts balance the budget, but also slow down economic recovery efforts. State lawmakers say things are looking better now in Kansas than they did back in April, but we're still facing a shortfall.
There's so many needs in a state that even when you have all the revenue you need, you cannot meet all of the needs. But you do the best you can.
What about basic services, can care, roads, schools? Are they in danger of cuts at this point?
Are they in danger of cuts? Yes. We have to look at where the revenue is and what we're able to come up with.
Though Representative Stephen Johnson isn't sure he agrees with the governor on asking for federal aid, saying he worries about the impact that would have on the national debt load, which also comes out of your taxes. It's a concern that didn't stop the governor from asking for that help.
We need a coherent top-down strategy.
And joining this week to take a closer look at this topic and others, we have Adam Strunk, managing editor at the Newton Now. And by Zoom, joining us, we have from Friends University political scientist Dr. Russell Arvin Fox. Thank you both so much. I'm going to start off with the political aspect of this. This kind of a pronouncement is not exactly a career maker for most politicians. Is that kind of a sign of just how serious she's taking things?
It's a sign of how serious it is, but it's also a sign that she is facing the same challenges that governors all across the country are facing. This isn't something that breaks down along Democratic and Republican lines. Governors are responsible for all sorts of basic services that at one time might have been handled by the federal government but have been outsourced to the states, or at one time might have been handled by municipal governments but have been taken over by the states. It's the reason why the federal government provided through the CARES Act so much support to fight the pandemic to states originally. Now that money is basically all tapped out, or soon will be. And Governor Kelly is saying the same sort of thing that you're hearing a lot of governors, both Republican and Democratic, all across the country saying. We have these responsibilities, we have these obligations, our citizens have these needs, and we don't have the revenue to supply it on our own. And this is certainly an issue that we have seen kind of building for a while now, Adam. But I know when I interact with my viewers, there's so many issues out there right now that are kind of so overwhelming. It almost seems like this one's getting lost a little bit.
Well, it's getting lost because it's not an immediate impact, right? Mm-hmm. People care about going to work. People care about paying bills. People care if they're wearing masks or not. That's stuff that's an immediate impact. This is stuff which we won't see for a year or maybe 6 months when we have a slowdown, or, I mean, even through the brown back cuts, we didn't see the effects of those for years and years. So again, this is something that, I mean, it's an important issue. It just moves a little bit further down because it's not something that's right in front of you.
And certainly not right in front of us is a big deal right now with everything else we're dealing with.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I will say though that like these federal dollars have helped on our local economies. Like the PPP program, like that kept a lot of businesses going. That was helpful. I mean, we have all of these counties received through as a pass through the state federal funding to pay for extra protective equipment, testing matters, pay for some of the city shortfalls. Like that has had a large impact. I mean, Harvey County alone received $7 million through this program. And so like, I don't think that it's wrong for the governor to just be making sure that Kansas gets its fair share. I don't think that plays poorly.
Yeah, and the State Finance Council just this last week approved the last distribution of those CARE Act funds that came to Kansas. That included quite a bit of money for additional testing.
Yeah.
Russell, the question about additional testing, whether we should be testing folks who are symptomatic, asymptomatic, that's kind of even taken on a political aspect these days.
Well, there's nothing that doesn't take on a political aspect, obviously, especially in an election year. But yeah, it's true. Arguments about appropriate levels of funding and needed support for testing, for other sorts of medical responses, you know, they are being argued about in Congress, and the Republican and Democratic leadership are both staking out their positions. And you see the same sort of thing that, you know, is taking place on our level. I want to add, though, you know, something in regards to all of this. You know, you're talking about the testing, we're talking about aid directly to businesses and so forth. Yes, it is true that an awful lot of these services that are currently state responsibilities are the sorts of things that are only going to have impacts that become visible over time. But there are plenty of exceptions to that. You can talk to people who are looking, you know, at the support that they can directly receive from different state programs in terms of being able to purchase educational materials in order to take care of the bills that they have as business owners. And this kind of support is directly, immediately present for these folks. So while for large numbers of Kansans, maybe this question is still somewhat abstract, let's not forget that there are a fair number of Kansans where this sort of argument, that this sort of plea that the governor is making to the federal government will have impacts that are present in their lives immediately.
So yes or no, put on your prognosticator hat. Are we going to see more federal aid this year?
Yeah, I think we will. I think we will because there's enough people calling for it of both political parties. You've got enough both Republican and Democratic governors that are calling for it that, President Trump will want to make certain that something gets through Congress so that that's not an albatross around his neck as we move to Election Day.
I'm talking about moving toward Election Day. Foreclosures and evictions could hit the Kansas economy hard. Bankers are saying early next year, but we could start to see that developing here in the next couple of months unless they get more help from the federal government. That's what they told state lawmakers this week. The Kansas Reflector reports bankers warned lawmakers Wednesday that federal disaster aid and the state's ban on foreclosures and evictions has just delayed the financial and economic pain that's likely still coming. That's assuming there's not a fresh government bailout before the end of the year, they told a joint House and Senate committee working on economic recovery plans. They said without more aid money, cities and counties are bracing for troubles to start with the December tax payments, and banks are expecting past due rates to begin rising next January. Brad Yeager, president of Legacy Bank in Wichita, said while stimulus packages with things like increased unemployment checks and access to business loans have helped Kansans keep up with loan payments so far, quote, some of them have only a little gas left in the tank. He advised lawmakers to consider tax relief on things like real estate taxes and income taxes if a vaccine is not approved by year's end. And certainly there's a lot in that, but one of the big issues was that recommendation of tax cuts to help keep more money in people's pockets. But you and I, Adam, we've both covered as local governments have had to make drastic cuts already because of a lack of revenue coming in. Can they really afford to make more cuts?
Well, the question is, they don't know. You know what I mean? Like, it's since March, we haven't had a good idea of what these budgets were going to look like. We freaked out that sales tax was going to be down. Now Harvey County, our county, sales tax isn't down. So like that's a big positive. But then like you have city governments, local governments like losing out on franchise fees because weirdly enough, people aren't using as much electricity when they're working from home. There's just all of these like strange little moving pieces. And so it's really hard for them to tell what their budgets are going to be. I know a lot of our local governments have made cuts just to preempt this. Like we're going to spend a little bit less now so we know what's going on later on. So like, I mean, it's a big question mark.
Yeah.
I know that's not a comprehensive answer, but
that is, I mean, really a big question mark. That's what we're all dealing with right now as we try to feel our way through this. And have you seen, Russell, any concern from local governments about kind of just the discombobulation that all of this is creating?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, here in Wichita, we've seen deep divides in the city council as they have argued about how to deal with cuts that, you know, as were mentioned, are responding to events that haven't fully unfolded yet. We don't know what the projections are going to look like. We have some idea of declines in revenue. We have some pretty good guesses about some holes that are going to appear in budgets, but there's a lot that remains unknown. That really, I mean, goes back to the first story that came up in the episode. One of the reasons why cities are looking to the states and one of the reasons why states are looking to the national government is because there is so much that could still go badly. There's so much that could still get much worse in terms of our economy. And we're trying to build a cushion. We're trying to find whatever kind of supports we can. You know, the idea of cutting taxes in order to put more money in people's pockets is obviously a good idea when it comes to financial uncertainty. But it's a terrible idea when those cuts might involve people that seriously depend upon certain programs being cast into greater uncertainty themselves. Yeah, it's a total discombobulation all the way through, which is why we need leadership from the top.
Well, and to hop in there real quick, I mean, it depends where those tax cuts are too. If we're really, really concerned about the people on the bottom, maybe they want to cut food sales tax, or maybe they want to cut the tax bracket to the bottom income people. But it's, again, where are they asking for the cuts? And I think that's always where that question comes from.
And honestly, we're going to have to wait and see what the legislature does, because the bankers can say whatever they want. Legislators have the final say come January. So that is a debate that's a few months down the road, perhaps.
Bankers get a little bit of say.
That is true. They get to tell what they want to happen, for sure. Well, another growing debate is happening on campuses and in businesses across the state, across the country. It's over what should take precedence in a pandemic, patient privacy rights or public health. We saw that play out this last week at the Wichita State campus. Students at Wichita State are still finding out about the information behind this headline in the school paper. Do not tell. Many, like Ian Viner, can't understand the school's reasoning for barring instructors from sharing information about COVID-positive classmates.
I would hope that the university would kind of change its mind, I guess, because that's really important.
On a campus covered with signs warning students to wear masks and urging them to social distance, they say the more information they have, the better they can protect themselves. But professors like Dr. Alex Sternfeld-Dunn say there's another consideration involved: privacy.
We're definitely, I think, restricted a lot by the state law that passed. I think we also have some restrictions because of HIPAA and the Health Privacy Act.
As Faculty Senate President, Sternfeld-Dunn says he's discussed this issue with many of his coworkers. On top of the privacy concern, many say they don't feel equipped to become what amounts to unofficial contact tracers. And he believes if students are following the masking, hygiene, and social distancing rules.
And if you're doing all of those things, the risk goes down exponentially.
But students like Viner say they're not sure privacy should be the main concern in the face of a pandemic.
I think that this would probably be an exception for something as important as this.
Now, in a written statement, Wichita State said its contact tracing policy and procedures are in place to ensure compliance with state law, adding that in Sedgwick County, contact tracing is the sole responsibility of the Sedgwick County Health Department. That includes any contact tracing done on the campus. Now, Russell, I'm going to start with you on this. This is definitely a policy wonk debate. Putting on my Star Trek cap, this is kind of public health's Kobayashi Maru. There is no right answer here.
No, There is no right answer because there are very, very clear goods on both sides. I mean, the good when it comes to sharing all the information about any possible contagion is pretty obvious. You want people to know if they need to go into quarantine immediately. But at the same time, there's real goods for not creating a panic or not allowing rumors to spread or not, obliging people to be in a position where they have to share information that they might not be prepared to share otherwise because of the way it might affect yet other people. I was really struck by the comment made by the faculty member at Wichita State about becoming, in a sense, an informal contact tracer. Now, let's all acknowledge that every single community, every single neighborhood that we're part of is, in a sense, already doing these things. That's part of what it means to be a good citizen, to be a good neighbor. I recognize that depending upon the community or the workplace or the neighborhood, that might have different kind of cost calculations than others. I'm really, really sympathetic to people on larger university campuses where there's greater numbers of people that you have to deal with and consequently a greater multiplication of complications that face any of these decisions. At a small university like my own, Friends University, or at, like, for instance, Emporia State, a colleague of mine there, Michael Smith, recently wrote about this. There is a lot of informal information sharing that allows these small groups to maintain greater levels of security that are harder to maintain when you're dealing with a large campus or, for that matter, a big city. It is a really difficult thing to negotiate, and it's not going to be, the decisions are not going to be the same in every context.
Hey, certainly not the same. And Adam, what you're seeing farther north of Wichita is that some schools are taking different routes than others.
Well, yeah, and again, I'll be quick. One, props to the Sunflower for digging this up. Like, I think that's them doing good journalism. Two, the weakest thing I saw in what Russell hit on was the idea that informal contract tracers, it's not being an informal contract tracer to be like, hey, class, you might be you might have been exposed, maybe watch yourself for symptoms. I think that's just being a good human being. Three, as a journalist, like on the public health aspect where the public gets to know, like I feel like I always err on the side of like, you know what, if I'm going to school and if I'm possibly exposed, I want to know. I understand how a university is going to hide behind the bureaucracy and say, well, this is privacy. I get privacy all the time. Like every time I call and try to get a story, it's like, well, privacy issue, privacy issue. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. But like to talk about how some schools are doing differently, like we had Bethel, which is up in our area, they tested the entire student population. Once that student population was set, they then quarantined, and they made news because they had like a 10% positive rate. They quarantined all these kids, but I feel like there was a lot more communication than, what could have Bethel just said, well, we're not contact tracers, and just not told the student population who was quarantined? Maybe, but I'm just saying like there are different ways, and I think that it's a knee-jerk reaction to constantly say, we're not going to provide students any information. I'd want to know, but that's my thoughts.
And certainly a debate that is going on. I know in our newsroom we get the calls all the time about businesses. I'm sure you do as well. We haven't been told. We are not being told enough. There is certainly a legal aspect to it as well.
But again, it's the thought of the law and not the, sorry.
Yep. Well, there is also another debate, big surprise, that's picking up steam across the state. Mask mandates. Those opposed to the mandates showed up at first the Wichita City Council last week and then the Sedgwick County Commission this week to demand local leaders rethink mask requirements in Sedgwick County.
Is that correct? We can't go upstairs to the third floor?
Right. Last week we showed up at the courthouse. There was a group of us, about 15. And I feel like the door got slammed in our face.
This week, the county arranged for those who wish to speak to do so by Zoom from the county extension office in West Wichita.
You are using force to make people submit to an order that could ultimately make an individual's or entire population sicker.
I'm opposed to being forced to wear them.
I do not believe that you should have the right to tell us what we should do with our health.
Even with each speaker limited to just 3 minutes instead of the standard 5, it took nearly 3 hours for everyone to have their say. Some who came couldn't wait that long and had to leave before getting the chance to speak. Rachel Murphy was one of the first to step up to the podium. She said she's speaking out because she feels the commission is acting out of fear.
I don't want my community, my children, my grandchildren, the people that I love in this community to live in fear. I want us to live in the freedom that we have the right to. And these mandates are taking away from that.
Scott Pierce said he hopes Wednesday's speakers help change the conversation about masks and how to fight COVID-19.
It's the people speaking up. It's the voices being heard. Now, whether I don't have any grandeur that we're going to change policy today, but what it might really spurn is the opportunity to come to the table.
And Russell, I'm going to start with you again here. What kind of an impact does a turnout like this have on the public discussion, or in this case, have people pretty much already just made up their mind?
Well, I would think that at this point, pretty much everybody has made up their minds. And partly that's because of the political polarization that's already been mentioned here, the fact that everything so quickly becomes a Republican or Democratic issue. But beyond that kind of ideological settling, there's simply the fact that sometimes there are issues where people find their side and they accept it. And then there are issues where people find their side, but the ferment continues because the passion is there. The fact of the matter is that we in the United States have a very individualistic political culture. Here in the state of Kansas, there is a particularly strong emphasis on this kind of personal responsibility. And it's very easy for a lot of people, even not normally political people, to feel as though something that's being done for the common good, something that's being done for the public health, is something that's infringing upon their responsibility, and that's motivating them to speak out. Is that going to lead anybody to necessarily change their minds? No, but it will lead people to recognize, oh, this is a live issue. This is the sort of thing that we're going to have to continue to communicate about, because people aren't just getting settled in their corners. They're continuing to feel the pressure. They're continuing to express the arguments. And so that means both sides need to keep up the fight, in essence.
And certainly we've seen a lot of that here in Sedgwick County over the last couple of weeks. Johnson County had a similar meeting just the day before we filmed this episode. Are you seeing similar debates going on in Harvey County?
Yes, and I mean, the question was, do these things change the public viewpoint? I mean, what we need to be talking about is, do they change the elected officials' viewpoint? At this point, I think everyone's taken a bat to the elected officials. Like, they get emails and emails and emails, calls, one side, the other. Like, at this point, they've gotten yelled at from so many different people that I think that they are going to just make up their mind and go for. And that's where, you know, they kind of, some of the people against masks run into headwinds. In Harvey County, we had something like 50, maybe it was 40-something active cases when we put in a mask ordinance. Now that was down to, I haven't checked it today, but it was something like 13. We were averaging about 6 cases a day per week before we put in a mask ordinance, or just right after, and now we're averaging about 1.57. So when you're an elected official, you're charged with making policy, you're getting yelled at by 2 groups of people. You're going to start saying, okay, what data do I have from people I trust that allows me to make these decisions? And as we saw our county commission choose last week to uphold our mask mandate for another month, they're using the data.
Yeah.
So that's that.
Yeah. So masks are probably here to stay for a while.
At least in Harvey County. I don't know what you guys are doing.
Well, turning away from pandemic-related topics, let's talk about suspended driver's licenses in Kansas. Wichita Police debuted a new program Thursday designed to help lower the number of people arrested for unpaid traffic tickets. That could also help lower your car insurance rates.
We had about 15 to 20 people standing in line when we first got open at 9 o'clock. We even had people here at 7 o'clock waiting
for the chance to clear their names after the city issued warrants for their arrests over unpaid traffic tickets. Wichitans like Davette.
I mean, it just makes you feel a lot better.
This was her chance to get an old speeding ticket paid off without facing further punishments. Many Kansans have told Cake News this is how they started down the road to suspended driver's licenses. The insurance industry puts Kansas in the top 5 states nationwide for the number of Kansans with suspended licenses.
A lot of people don't even know that their licenses are suspended, and it could be for a parking meter ticket.
The more suspended licenses, the more Kansans who drive illegally, often just to make ends meet, means the higher insurance companies can raise your rates. Right now, the city says it has a lot of unpaid tickets.
There's just no way that we can go get them taken care of.
With the Second Chance Thursdays program, Wichitans come to the police.
Get them cleared up, assign them a new court date. If they can pay them, even better.
At first, Davette feared the program was a scam to make easy arrests, but decided clearing her record was worth the risk. She's glad she did.
It took about 5 or 7 minutes. They just ran my name, wrote the paperwork out, and sent me on my way.
And when I spoke with Davette, she told me it was a lot less scary to go here, just this nondescript building, off in the city somewhere, talk to a single person, not a lot of officialese. Yes, they're in uniform, but a lot less scary than having to show up in court, having to work their way through a phone call system or figure out a website.
Or getting pulled over for a warrant on the site of Kellogg, going through that process. I mean, to me, I think that's a great program that Wichita's putting in place. I mean, I think that's a good program not only for people who maybe have gotten nicked on a parking or a traffic ticket or something, but also for law enforcement agencies that want to keep officers safe. That decreases the amount of times officers have to pull people over on the highway, issue warrants. We hear all the time about how that is one of the most dangerous times for police officers, pulling people over. Well, this takes some of that out of the mix. So for departments that really do care about keeping officers safe, instead of maybe having a reason to search cars and look for drugs, I think this is a really great program.
Yeah. Well, and Russell, I know that last year we've been doing stories on this issue on Cake News for about a year now, shared several of them on Kansas Week. Last year, the legislature was moving forward on several different reform issues involving suspended licenses, got interrupted by the pandemic. What are the chances that those regain momentum going into January?
I think there's a pretty good chance. And the reason for it is, kind of what we were saying before. People might have different attitudes about something, but then they take a look at the data, they take a look at the information, kind of in the way that Adam was referring to, and they recognize that this is something that they need to keep after, that they need to keep talking about. There have been a lot of criminal justice people that have tried to emphasize the value of allowing people these kinds of second chances for a long time. This stuff is slowly working its way forward. I agree with everything that Adam said. This isn't, there's no downside to doing these sorts of things, and people will realize that, and they'll build upon it for future reforms, or at least I'm hopeful they will.
All right. Well, thank you again, Russell, Adam, for joining me here this week. I hope you've enjoyed our discussion as much as I have. We'd also like to thank our news partners at Cake News, KSN News, and the Wichita Eagle for sharing their materials with us. I hope you've enjoyed the discussion. If you'd like to continue it on social media, just look for KPTS Channel 8 or Pilar Pedraza TV on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. For now, stay safe and have a great week. And that's it. Well done.
Southwest National Bank has proudly served Wichita and its surrounding communities for over 100 years. We are happy to support KPTS, Public Television for Kansas.